upon hundreds of years old. It must certainly have had its original abiding place in temple or palace, and of itself formed some part of the gorgeous picture which was now rapidly shaping itself in Thurston's imagination. Thurston's evenings were usually spent in a dream of bliss which was itself a source of deep mental content. He was surprised on this occasion to find that contemplation of the ivory god was leading him into a state of unusual unrest. A strange desire to sit down at his desk, literally at the feet of the god, and write, filled him with strenuous force. It was years since he had ever written at night, and the mere thought of doing so now made him almost afraid. But the fear vanished quickly, and he was presently conscious of nothing but that he was shortly going to sit down at his desk. It was as if the ivory god had laid some command upon him. He turned up the flame of his spirit lamp, heated more water, and mixed himself more of the drug. A little later he found himself laying out paper on his blotting pad and examining the nib of a pen. And after a time, as if it had been the most natural thing in the world, he settled himself into his elbow chair, and after one long, searching look at the ivory god, he dipped his pen into the ink and began to write. This is the story of the loves and hates of men and women that have long been dust, the story of a day when the red earth was young, and the gods sat steadfast in their places, the story of a time and times, and behold, it has never been told to human ear till now. After that came a long night of work such as Thurston had never before done in his life. It was 10 o'clock when he wrote the first words on the top sheet of the pile of manuscript paper which he had laid ready to hand. As each successive hour struck the silver voiced clock on the chimney piece, it did but interrupt the gentle scribbling of a rapidly moving pen. On Thurston's left hand stood the spirit lamp, the kettle, the decanter, and the glass. Now and then he turned to these things and mixed the drug. On his right hand there gradually accumulated a pile of closely written manuscript. Above him the amethyst eyes grew purple in the lamplight. The ivory god stared into the gloom beyond the writer's head. The gray light stole through the cracks and crannies of the shutters, and found Thurston still writing. Much later the old woman who acted as bedmaker and charwoman knocked loudly at the outer door. Thurston shouted her to go away and leave him alone, and his pen travelled on and on as if it would never stop. It was about 3 days after this that a famous publisher with whom Thurston was acquainted in slight fashion was somewhat astonished to find the latter waiting for him in his private room. He stared at Thurston curiously, noting with the keen eye of a practical man of the world that his visitor wore a strange expression and seemed to be wrapped in an atmosphere of mystery. He was shaved and washed and wore his best garments, but there was a strange pallor on his face, a strange light in his eyes, and his voice was as unnaturally steady as the cold, almost lifeless hand which he placed in the publisher's palm. The publisher, who had never been able to understand Thurston's strangeness of manner, reverted to an earlier suspicion and wondered if his visitor had been drinking, but he failed to perceive either twitch or tremor in face or hand, and his visitor's voice was even and firm to the verge of monotony. "Some time ago," said Thurston, "you were good enough to suggest to me that I should write a romance of Eastern life. It seemed to you that I possessed the necessary knowledge of the East to attempt such a book." "Quite so," said the other. "I don't know any man better fitted. You've been working in that direction all your life, haven't you? In fact, it's been a wonder to me that you never thought of the thing yourself." Thurston produced a parcel of manuscript. "I have here," he said, "a considerable portion of such a work. There is much I might say to you about it, but at present I prefer not to say anything. Yes, it is not an ordinary work, and I should like some assurance from you that it shall be read for you by some one competent to judge of its merits." "I'll give it to Flintford to read," said the publisher. "How does his name strike you? He's about the best man I can think of." "I am quite prepared to accept Mr. Flintford's judgment," replied Thurston. "Indeed, I intended suggesting his name to you." "Then I will leave this portion of the manuscript with you?" "Do," answered the publisher. and I'll send it on to Flintford by special messenger at once, and ask him to read it. About the rest of the book, now." "The remaining portion," said Thurston, "will be delivered to you when it is written." And with that, and a frigid shaking of the publisher's outstretched hand, he went away, walking through the outer office, as one of the clerks said, like a ghost. The next morning Flintford walked into the publisher's office, looking very excited. "I say," he explained, "where did you get that manuscript which you sent me yesterday? And have you got the rest?" "Well, what of it?" asked the publisher, ignoring the second part of the question. "Is it good stuff? Will it do? Would it sell?" "Good? My dear sir, it is the most wonderful piece of imaginative work I've ever read in my life. It's amazing, stupendous, quite confusing in its brilliance. I began it last night. I went on reading until breakfast time this morning," answered Flintford. "I never read anything like it. Indeed, I wouldn't have believed that we had a brain amongst us that could imagine such a work. Look here. You know I am by no means an enthusiastic person. Well, this book, if it keeps up that level all through, is the biggest find of the last half century. For sheer imagination the man beats Poe hollow." "You think it will make a hit?" inquired the publisher. "It is the greatest thing I have ever had put before me," answered the critic. "I cannot understand the power in it. Who is this man? How does he come to be able to recreate Hindu life as it must have been thousands of years ago? Where did he get such an overwhelming imagination? There's something that's almost unholy, unearthly about the whole thing. It's a great book, a rare book. I should like to see the author." "I will try to get him here at 3 this afternoon," said the publisher. "Come in after lunch. I may tell you that he is a strange person. Never done anything but an occasional article in the heavy reviews, but, I fancy, cram full of the East." "That," said the critic, "is evident. I'll come at 3." At 3 o'clock Thurston was shown into the publisher's private room, and introduced to the great critic. Thurston, if possible, was more ghost-like than ever, more emotionless, more insensible to any outward influence. He sat with fixed, passionless eyes, listening, while the critic praised his work and asked questions. It was not until all this had been said that he spoke. "I think I may take you both into my confidence," he said. "I conclude, Mr. Maine, that you will publish this book, and therefore I see no reason why you and Mr. Flintford should be kept in ignorance as to its real history. I may tell you that the story is not mine at all. It is being dictated to me. The circumstances are peculiar, but I feel sure that Mr. Flintford, with his knowledge of the East, will quite understand. I recently came into possession of an image of the god Ganesha, wonderfully wrought in ivory and adorned with amethyst eyes. The story, of which you have read some portion, is being dictated to me by this image, or, more probably, by this god represented by it. I think you will understand," he said, turning to Flintford with an air which had something appealing in it. "Yes," Flintford said quietly, "I quite understand." "I felt the influence of the god," continued Thurston, "as soon as I saw the image. It is a strange, a very fascinating influence. It impelled me to write against my will, and then I found that I was but a mouthpiece. Everything has been put into my lips, I should say pen. Clearly, what I have written is the story of the image." "And when," asked Flintford kindly, "when do you suppose the end of this story will be reached, Mr. Thurston?" Thurston produced another packet of manuscript. He laid it on the publisher's desk. "I believe," he said, "I believe the end will come tonight. If," here he glanced from one face to the other, "if you would like to see the ivory statue, and could call tomorrow morning about noon, I will show it to you. It is certain that it possesses a strange influence." When Thurston had gone away, the two men looked at each other. "Mad as a hatter," said the publisher. The critic shook his head. "It seems strange," he said, "but really, I don't think so. Does he drink?" "I used to think he did," replied the publisher. "He has done work for me now and then, and he sometimes came here with all the symptoms of intoxication upon him, and yet he was always clear headed and capable, if incoherent of speech. What I don't understand just now is the frightful deliberation with which he speaks, the sort of unearthly coldness and composure of his manner. But, I say, to tell us that the book is being dictated to him by